A millionaire replaced his wife with a younger mistress and handed her the keys to the mansion. But while he reveled in his new life, his ex-wife was orchestrating a quiet storm. What she revealed at the end shattered his empire, proving that the most dangerous betrayals are the ones you never see coming. The sound of heels echoed through the marble foyer, each step deliberate, echoing beneath the crystal chandelier that had once been Evelyn Mercer's pride and joy. Now, that same chandelier flickered above a room dressed for a different woman, one with a louder taste, a sharper laugh, and an unapologetic need to be seen. The mansion, once a quiet nest of warmth and order, pulsed now with noise, newness, and a forced grandeur that couldn't quite mask the lingering fingerprints of the past. Andrew Mercer stood near the staircase, a glass of brandy in hand, watching guests parade through his newly redecorated halls like performers in a show he believed he directed. The art on the walls was bold now, the lighting colder, and even the scent of the air had changed, replaced by something spicier, heavier. Everything in that house had been altered, repainted, and curated to reflect his new chapter. Or, rather, to reflect her. Savannah Hale descended the stairs with a slow, purposeful glide, her sequined dress catching the light in all the right places. Her honey blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her lips parted just slightly into the kind of smile designed not to welcome, but to dazzle. She paused halfway down, eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Andrew. That smile deepened, and she quickened her pace toward him. "I can't lie," she said, slipping her arm into his. "I think I've outdone myself." Andrew chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You wanted elegance. You got it." She turned her head toward the room, basking in the attention. "I got more than elegance. I got everything." And she had. The mansion, the influence, the man. She had stepped right into a life she didn't build, with no shame about claiming it as hers. What the guests saw that night was extravagance. Champagne fountains, string quartets, imported desserts flown in from Europe. But beneath the glitter, there was a tension no one spoke of directly. A sharp silence hidden between conversations, a question no one dared ask aloud. Where was Evelyn? No one had seen her since the divorce. There had been whispers, of course, stories about her leaving quietly, without drama, refusing even to challenge the property settlement. She had taken her things, signed the papers, and disappeared like fog. Savannah had smirked at the idea, joking privately that Evelyn had melted like an old candle, useful once, but no longer needed. Andrew, too, had convinced himself she was gone from their lives, irrelevant. He didn't speak her name anymore, but somehow, the mansion still carried her presence. In the kitchen layout Savannah found awkward, in the garden paths that made no sense to her. In the silence of the upstairs study Andrew had yet to step into since Evelyn walked out. As the evening progressed, Savannah drifted from group to group, laughing too loudly, sipping too fast. She made a show of knowing the names of Andrew's colleagues, complimenting their wives, asking pointed questions about businesses she barely understood. But her performance cracked in small places, an eye roll when someone mispronounced her name, a snap at a server who brought the wrong drink, a flash of annoyance when Andrew stepped away mid-conversation to answer a call. In the hallway, Andrew leaned against the wall, phone pressed to his ear, eyes narrowing. "No, I don't care what the projections say. Cut the cost, or cut the client," he barked, before ending the call abruptly. He ran a hand over his face, sighing. This wasn't the life he imagined when he signed those divorce papers. He thought he was trading comfort for thrill, familiarity for fire. But lately, the thrill had started to fray at the edges, and the fire sometimes burned in the wrong places. He stepped back into the party to find Savannah in a heated conversation with a guest, an older man who had once been close to Evelyn. Andrew approached just in time to hear the man say, "It's just strange, that's all. Evelyn had a grace this house hasn't seen since." Savannah's smile snapped into something colder. "Perhaps it's not grace you're missing, but control. Some men have a hard time with women who speak their minds." The guest raised his eyebrows, taken aback, and Andrew quickly intervened, placing a firm hand on Savannah's back. "Excuse us," he said, steering her away with a tight-lipped smile. She jerked away from his touch as soon as they were out of earshot. "Did you hear what he said to me?" "I heard enough," Andrew said evenly. "You could have let it go." She stared at him, eyes blazing. I won't be compared to a woman who abandoned you." Andrew didn't respond, because deep down, he knew Evelyn hadn't abandoned him. She had stepped aside, gracefully, silently, and there was something about that silence that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. As the last guests trickled out and the music faded, Andrew returned to his study, the one untouched since the divorce. He stepped inside for the first time in months. Dust had settled over the desk. The scent of old books and lavender lingered faintly in the air. He stood still, taking it in, almost forgetting why he came. Then he noticed the drawer, ajar, just slightly. He pulled it open and found a single envelope resting inside. No address, no signature, just his name, written in Evelyn's handwriting. He hesitated, fingers hovering above it, then slid the envelope into his pocket without reading it. He didn't want to admit it, but something inside him had shifted. That night, as Savannah drifted off beside him in bed, Andrew lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The party had been a success by all external measures, but a seed of unease had been planted deep within him. A house, no matter how lavish, couldn't bury history. And a woman like Evelyn didn't vanish quietly without leaving something behind. He didn't know yet what that something was, but he was about to find out. Before we dive deeper into this story, tell me, what would you do if your partner replaced you and gave everything you built to someone else? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Rate the story from 0 to 10, and if you're enjoying the drama so far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Things are just getting started. The first morning Savannah Hale woke up in the Mercer mansion, sunlight was pouring through the oversized windows, spilling across silk sheets she had never chosen and furniture she had not bought. She stretched slowly, leisurely, savoring the softness of the Egyptian cotton beneath her and the weight of the silence around her. For the first time, the house was hers, or so she believed. She wandered barefoot across the bedroom, admiring the gilded mirror on the far wall. She paused to study her reflection, brushing her fingers down the delicate fabric of her satin robe. The woman who looked back at her was triumphant, beautiful, young, victorious. She had climbed from receptionist to mistress to the new Mrs. Mercer, and now stood in a bedroom where another woman had once slept beside a man Savannah now claimed as her own. Downstairs, the house was already in motion. Staff moved quietly through their routines, but there was a stiffness in their posture, a caution in their steps. It wasn't fear, it was discomfort. They didn't yet know how to exist under Savannah's gaze, how to respond to her commands, how to measure the space between respect and resentment. These were the same people who had served Evelyn Mercer for over a decade. They weren't used to perfume that lingered like smoke in the hallway, or instructions given with clipped tones rather than quiet requests. Savannah descended the stairs, chin held high, and entered the kitchen where Maria, the housekeeper, was overseeing the preparation of breakfast. Savannah looked around, unimpressed by the understated layout that Evelyn had once favored. "This kitchen needs a renovation," she said casually, her voice slicing through the air. "It's far too modest for a house this size." Maria hesitated for a moment before responding. Mrs. Mercer had it designed for practicality. Savannah raised an eyebrow. "Well, I'm not Mrs. Mercer," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And I want something grander. Begin researching luxury appliance packages and modern cabinetry. I expect a proposal by the end of the week." Maria nodded stiffly and turned away. She had spent years managing that household with gentle efficiency, balancing schedules and supervising staff. She had respected Evelyn. She had worked with her, not beneath her. But Savannah was different. Savannah issued orders like declarations, and she seemed to believe that control came from presence alone. But power is rarely loud. The old queen had ruled quietly and effectively. Later that day, Savannah held a meeting with the staff in the drawing room, perched on an antique settee, as if she were a monarch addressing her court. Her fingers tapped the armrest impatiently as she listed changes she wanted. New uniforms, new service schedules, new protocols for addressing guests. She called it modernizing, but it felt more like erasing. The butler, Thomas, who had served the family since Andrew's father was alive, exchanged a discreet glance with Maria. There were no protests, but silence carried its own weight. When Savannah dismissed them, she leaned back with a satisfied smile, unaware that leadership couldn't be demanded, it had to be earned. Upstairs, in the master bathroom, She was inspecting the cabinetry again when she noticed a drawer Evelyn had left behind. Inside was a small wooden box, unassuming and elegant. Savannah opened it to find a stack of old handwritten notes, reminders, scribbled recipes, lists of guests, and wine pairings from past dinners. She scoffed softly and tossed the notes back inside. But one list caught her eye. It wasn't like the others. It was written in Evelyn's meticulous script, and each line contained names, people she didn't recognize, followed by cryptic notes. Hold firm. Knows too much. Speak only through Charles. Savannah frowned, unsure what she had found. She folded the note and tucked it in her purse. Something about it unsettled her, though she didn't quite know why. When Andrew returned home that evening, he found her seated in the formal dining room, flipping through catalogs. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie. "I'm redesigning the house," she said without looking up. "It needs to reflect who we are now." Andrew walked to the bar cart, pouring himself a drink. "Evelyn spent years designing this place. It doesn't need to be gutted overnight." Savannah finally glanced up, her voice soft but firm. "It does if it's going to stop feeling like her house." He paused for a moment, then nodded. "Do what you want. Just don't turn it into a showroom." She smiled sweetly. Of course not. But she would. Bit by bit, she would remove every trace of Evelyn's existence. Every painting, every flower arrangement, every piece of china Evelyn had carefully collected. It wasn't about decor. It was about dominance. Over the next few weeks, Savannah's influence spread through the house like perfume. Furniture was replaced, walls repainted, art switched, staff shuffled. Some left on their own, others were let go. Those who remained kept their heads down, adjusting to the rhythm of a new reign. But even as she tore down Evelyn's legacy, the house resisted her. Light bulbs flickered in rooms she rarely entered. Doors creaked inexplicably. A portrait she had ordered removed kept reappearing in a different wing of the house until she ordered it burned. She joked about it, but deep down, she knew she was still a visitor here. The walls remembered Evelyn. Andrew noticed small things too, details he hadn't cared about before. A vase that used to hold Evelyn's favorite lilies now sat empty. The scent of cinnamon from Evelyn's morning tea had vanished, replaced by Savannah's obsession with exotic incense that made his eyes water. He told himself it was progress, that he had chosen vitality over routine. But the house felt colder now. And so did he. One evening, as they hosted a dinner for a few of Andrew's business partners, Savannah made a joke at Evelyn's expense, offhand and bitter. The room went silent for a beat too long. One of the guests, an older woman with sharp eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "Evelyn had a different style. That's true," she said softly. "But she had a way of making everyone feel at home." Savannah smiled tightly. "I'm not here to make people feel at home. I'm here to elevate." Andrew took a slow sip of his wine, watching the tension ripple through the room. After the guests left, he confronted her. "You don't need to keep comparing yourself to her," he said. "I'm not comparing," she replied. "Everyone else is." He didn't respond, because he knew she was right. That night, as he lay in bed beside her, he thought again about the envelope still sitting in the drawer of his study, unopened. He hadn't told Savannah about it. He didn't know why. Perhaps because a part of him didn't want to open it. Or perhaps because a part of him already knew he should. Outside, the garden Evelyn had planted was blooming again. Roses, dahlias, violets. The gardener hadn't yet replaced them. He claimed Savannah hadn't given new instructions. Or maybe he was just waiting. Because some things in that house didn't bend easily. Some roots ran deeper than Savannah could see. And Evelyn Mercer, wherever she was, hadn't finished writing her story. Not yet. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Andrew Mercer's private study, casting long shadows over the mahogany desk that once held documents Evelyn had organized with meticulous care. Now, the surface was cluttered with architectural sketches, luxury interior design samples, and unread proposals. The room that had once echoed with thoughtful conversation and purposeful decisions now stood as a showroom for half-finished ambitions and discarded ideas. Andrew sat at his desk, staring at the screen of his laptop, half-focused on a budget projection he barely understood. He tapped his fingers absently, ignoring the blinking red numbers in the corner of the spreadsheet. Numbers had never been his strength. Evelyn had managed those. She used to sit across from him, quietly turning complex data into clear strategy, making decisions that had elevated his ventures from average to admired. Now, she was gone, and he was left trying to fill a role he never truly understood. The truth was simple, though Andrew wasn't ready to say it aloud. Evelyn had been the foundation, the quiet architect behind everything that had worked. She had stayed out of the spotlight, but knew every client, remembered every supplier's birthday, balanced the books, made shrewd investments, and anticipated market shifts before they happened. She made it all seem effortless, and because it looked easy, Andrew assumed it was. But now, the consequences of her absence began to show. At first, they were small things. Missed deadlines, invoices unpaid, subtle dips in monthly revenue. A project he thought had been greenlit turned out to be stuck in legal review. A long-term client pulled out without notice. A marketing campaign launched with the wrong messaging and cost twice the projected budget. He dismissed these as growing pains, temporary missteps that would correct themselves. But they didn't. Andrew replaced his old advisors with fresh faces, young, bold, full of buzzwords and empty confidence. Savannah insisted he needed people who matched their new image, who could rebrand his business ventures to match their lifestyle. "We're not the same people anymore," she told him. "You can't rely on people stuck in your past." So he let go of the people who had stood beside him through years of steady growth. He believed Savannah when she said they were outdated. He wanted to believe that he didn't need the old ways, that he didn't need Evelyn's systems, Evelyn's people, Evelyn's voice guiding him from behind the curtain. The more he distanced himself from what once held his empire together, the more erratic the structure became. He began attending meetings with only half an idea of what he was agreeing to. He nodded through presentations he didn't understand, relied on Savannah's flashy, overly rehearsed pitches to woo new investors, and ignored the quiet warnings from seasoned partners. At home, he acted confident, assured, always talking about future plans and international expansion. But in private, his sleep grew shallow, his drinking more frequent, his frustration sharper. Savannah, meanwhile, reveled in her new role. She insisted on attending meetings, not as a passive observer, but as an equal, offering suggestions, interrupting financial consultants, proposing ideas with no understanding of their implications. Andrew humored her at first. He liked the attention she drew, the way people noticed her, the way she added glamour to rooms that used to be filled with dry conversation. But soon, her presence became less charming and more obstructive. She spoke over legal advisors, contradicted accountants, and dismissed administrative concerns as unimportant distractions. When the CFO tried to explain that cash flow was tightening, Savannah waved him off with a laugh and told Andrew he was just being conservative. "Money flows where confidence goes," she said breezily, pouring herself another glass of champagne. It wasn't just the business that suffered. Andrew's relationship with the people closest to him began to fray. His sister, Victoria, a sharp and pragmatic woman who had never fully trusted Savannah, voiced her concerns during a Sunday brunch. "I've seen this before," she said as she sipped her coffee. "Flash over substance. You're trading your roots for surface." Andrew bristled at her tone, defensive without knowing why. "You just don't like that things are changing," he snapped. "You liked it better when Evelyn ran everything." Victoria didn't argue. She simply shrugged and looked away. "Maybe I liked it better when things worked." That night, Andrew sat alone in the garden Evelyn had designed herself. He remembered watching her kneel in the dirt, hands covered in soil, arranging rose bushes and hydrangeas while he stood on the porch, sipping wine and talking on the phone. He hadn't understood her devotion to the plants, the structure of the space. It seemed unnecessary to him then, but now, in the silence of the night, he realized it was one of the only parts of the estate that still breathed naturally. Savannah had wanted to tear it down and install a stone fountain. He had postponed the idea, saying they'd revisit it later. But maybe, deep down, he knew some things weren't meant to be touched. One evening, a call came in from a longtime partner, Michael Reeves, a seasoned investor who had been with Andrew since the early days. "I'm pulling out," Michael said bluntly. "There's no transparency anymore. Your numbers aren't matching your projections, and your operations feel unstable." Andrew tried to protest, but Michael cut him off. "You had something strong once. Don't throw it away trying to make noise. Not everything flashy is valuable." The line went dead, and Andrew stood in his study for several minutes, holding the phone to his ear long after the call ended. He turned slowly toward his desk and sat down, opening the drawer where the envelope from Evelyn still rested. He had told himself he'd throw it away, that it didn't matter. But now, with the walls shaking around him, he needed to know what she had left behind. He unfolded the paper, expecting a final jab, a bitter farewell. But there was no venom, no sarcasm, just a short, precise note in her handwriting. "You're building something on sand. I hope you realize before it sinks." He read it again, then a third time. He folded it slowly and set it back in the drawer. Savannah walked in moments later, complaining about a furniture delivery being delayed. He barely heard her. His eyes remained fixed on the desk. Something had cracked inside him, not fully broken yet, but cracked enough to let doubt seep through. He began to wonder, not if he had made a mistake, but how many and how deeply they ran. Not just in his marriage, not just in business, but in the silent choices he had made when he let go of the one person who had never needed credit to hold everything together. Evelyn had disappeared quietly, but her absence echoed louder than Savannah's presence ever could. And Andrew, for the first time, started to listen. It began with small things, the kind of details most people would overlook. A missing inventory sheet in the pantry, a briefcase misplaced, then mysteriously returned without explanation, a delivery rerouted, arriving 3 days late with no record of the change. These were the kinds of things Evelyn would have caught before they ever became problems, the kinds of errors she used to solve quietly before anyone else even knew they existed. But now, there was no Evelyn, and the mansion had started to shift in her absence, not only in its decor, but in its rhythm, its soul, its silent understanding of how everything once ran seamlessly behind the scenes. Under Savannah's watch, that rhythm faltered, and the people who worked inside those walls felt it first. Maria noticed it during the Monday inventory check. The kitchen staff had reported shortages, ingredients that had been ordered but never arrived. At first, she blamed the supplier. Then she checked the logs and found discrepancies in the delivery schedule. When she questioned the new house manager Savannah had hired, he waved it off with a lazy shrug. "Probably just a system glitch," he said, sipping espresso in a cup Evelyn used to keep reserved for guests. Maria said nothing, but her gut tightened. Glitches didn't repeat themselves in patterns. And systems didn't break like this unless someone was pushing the wrong buttons. Upstairs, Savannah remained blissfully unaware. She spent her days in silk robes and her evenings entertaining guests she barely remembered the next day. She drifted through the house like a woman playing dress-up in someone else's life, not realizing that the walls had not fully accepted her, and neither had the people within them. Even the ones who smiled at her in the hallways did so with eyes that never softened. The house had grown colder under her reign. Staff exchanged whispered glances more than words. Conversations ended the moment she entered a room. And though she believed herself adored, Savannah was merely tolerated, at best. Thomas, the head butler, had served the Mercer estate since Andrew was in college. He had seen the rise of fortunes and the fall of empires, all while polishing silver and preparing wine lists. He knew when a household was in harmony and when it was in decline. And now, he saw the signs too clearly to ignore. He started keeping notes, discreet, coded entries in a small black journal he kept beneath the liquor cabinet. Delivery errors, staff departures, expense irregularities. He didn't know what it all meant yet, but he knew something was wrong. Not just mismanagement, not just Savannah's arrogance. Something deeper, something coordinated. One evening, as he passed through the east corridor to check on the security system, he caught a glimpse of a figure entering the wine cellar. A figure who shouldn't have had access to that part of the house. He paused, unsure whether to investigate or report it directly to Andrew. But by the time he reached the cellar, it was empty. The lock was open, but nothing seemed missing. Still, the air felt off. It wasn't fear, it was familiarity. Something had returned to that house, something that didn't belong to Savannah, and Thomas had no doubt it had Evelyn's fingerprints on it. Meanwhile, Andrew had grown increasingly preoccupied. He spent more time away from home, seeking solace in his downtown office, where at least the walls didn't whisper back at him. But even there, the fallout had begun. One of his junior partners had flagged a financial discrepancy in the quarterly report, a $30,000 misallocation that no one could trace. "It's probably just an accounting error," Savannah told him that night as she swirled wine in a crystal glass. "You're too uptight lately. Let the team handle it." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust that these were isolated glitches. But he remembered the way Evelyn used to dig deep at the first sign of inconsistency, how she used to say, "Small cracks become sinkholes if you ignore them long enough." He didn't say it aloud, but the phrase kept looping through his mind, unsettling him more than the error itself. Back at the mansion, Maria had begun meeting discreetly with Thomas in the greenhouse after hours. They pretended to discuss floral rotations, but their conversations had little to do with plants. "She's blind," Maria said one evening, shaking her head. "She thinks she's controlling this place, but she doesn't even see what's unfolding beneath her feet." Thomas nodded grimly. "Something's happening. Someone's orchestrating it. The deliveries, the system failures, the missing files. This isn't just chaos. It's deliberate." "Do you think she knows?" Maria asked quietly. "No," he replied. "She's too busy chasing chandeliers and throwing dinner parties. But someone is pushing buttons from behind the curtain." They didn't say Evelyn's name, but both thought it. Both knew only one person had the patience and knowledge to dismantle the mansion from within without ever stepping foot through the front door. One afternoon, Savannah discovered a sealed envelope addressed to Andrew tucked beneath a stack of renovation invoices. It bore no return address. Curious, she opened it, something she never would have dared do in Evelyn's time, but now considered her right. Inside was a single page. No letterhead, just a brief note in precise handwriting. "I wonder how long it takes to notice when you've lost something you never appreciated." Savannah's hands trembled slightly. She didn't recognize the handwriting, but the message felt like an accusation. She crumpled the note and tossed it into the fireplace, watching it burn. But the words remained with her, haunting the corners of her mind in quiet moments. That same week, 2 longtime vendors pulled their contracts without explanation. When Savannah confronted Andrew, he brushed it off as coincidence. "Business is unpredictable," he said, but even he didn't believe it anymore. The veneer was cracking, and no amount of luxury fabric could cover it. Late one night, as Savannah walked the halls in her robe, she paused outside the study and thought she heard voices. She opened the door quickly, expecting to find Andrew on a call. But the room was empty, bathed in the soft glow of the desk lamp. The air felt cold, and the scent of lavender, Evelyn's scent, lingered faintly in the room. She closed the door quietly behind her, retreating to their bedroom, where Andrew was already asleep. She stared at him for a long time, wondering for the first time if he, too, felt it, the slow unraveling of control, the presence of something unseen, unspoken, undeniable. The whispers in the halls were growing louder, and the queen they thought they had replaced might never have truly left at all. It wasn't long before Savannah began to feel the weight of her own crown. Being the new face of the Mercer estate was no longer just about satin robes and grand staircases. It was about presence, influence, control. And if the whispers in the halls had taught her anything, it was that claiming a throne wasn't enough. One had to defend it. She wasn't Evelyn, and she didn't intend to pretend she was. Evelyn had ruled quietly, subtly, almost invisibly. Savannah had no interest in quiet. She wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be remembered. She was determined to make a statement not just in Andrew's house, but in the city's social scene. She believed this was her moment to shine, to erase the ghost of the woman who had come before her, to declare, boldly and undeniably, that she had arrived. She began planning a formal gala, something extravagant, unforgettable, and impossible to ignore. The kind of event that would establish her as more than just the new wife of a wealthy man, but as a power player in her own right. "It'll be the talk of the season," she said to Andrew over breakfast one morning, flipping through a list of catering companies and decor options. "Something this house hasn't seen before. Bold, lavish, sophisticated." Andrew looked up from his phone, mildly amused. "You really think a party is what we need right now?" Savannah narrowed her eyes slightly. "This isn't just a party, Andrew. It's about positioning. Perception matters. People need to see who we are now." He didn't argue, but he didn't exactly support it either. His silence was permission enough for Savannah, and within days, she had hired a team of event planners, ordered custom invitations, and commissioned a string quartet and a celebrity chef. She spent hours in fittings, selecting gowns and jewelry with the same urgency someone might use to plan a war strategy. And in her own way, that's exactly what this was, a battle for control, reputation, dominance. She wasn't just throwing a party. She was making a statement. She would outshine Evelyn's memory if it was the last thing she did. But beneath all the glamour and preparation, the mansion itself continued to resist her. Suppliers backed out without warning. A power outage delayed delivery of lighting equipment. Staff members called in sick on the day of a critical planning meeting. Even the florist misread the order and sent chrysanthemums instead of the white orchids Savannah had insisted upon. She was beginning to feel it. Not just the chaos, but the undercurrent of defiance threading through the estate, as if the house itself were rejecting her. And she was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by walls and whispers. Savannah doubled down, dismissing anyone who questioned her decisions. When Maria raised concerns about the event budget exceeding previous expenditures, Savannah waved her off coldly. "We're not running a charity anymore," she snapped. "We're building legacy." Maria said nothing, but her eyes spoke louder than words. The night of the gala arrived under heavy clouds. Rain threatened to spoil the outdoor garden reception Savannah had meticulously designed, but she refused to move the event indoors. "People will remember it," she said through clenched teeth as staff scrambled to adjust umbrellas and lighting fixtures. "They'll remember how I turned a storm into elegance." The guests arrived one by one, socialites, entrepreneurs, political figures, all lured by curiosity and gossip. The mansion glittered with string lights and champagne fountains, and Savannah moved among her guests like a queen surveying her court. She wore a silver gown that shimmered under the lights, her hair swept into a regal chignon, her makeup flawless. She greeted guests with polished charm, complimented outfits, made introductions, and laughed at jokes that barely amused her. To the untrained eye, she was radiant, magnetic, commanding. But to those who watched more closely, cracks began to show. Her conversations lacked substance. Her compliments were rehearsed. Her attempts to connect with influential guests often fell flat. She spoke of art she didn't understand, markets she couldn't explain, and causes she didn't truly care about. When a well-known donor asked her about the Mercer Foundation's next initiative, she stumbled over the response, deflecting to Andrew, who stood at the bar with a drink in hand, observing everything with quiet detachment. "You're doing fine," Andrew said to her later, when she cornered him in the hallway, demanding reassurance. "I'm not looking for fine," she hissed. "I want to be unforgettable." He didn't respond right away. He studied her for a moment, then said softly, "You are." But even he didn't sound convinced. Later in the evening, a guest approached Andrew, a woman he hadn't seen in years, once a close colleague of Evelyn's. She smiled politely and said, "Savannah certainly brings a different energy." Andrew chuckled awkwardly. "She's passionate." The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, but passion doesn't always mean presence." Andrew didn't sleep well that night. He tossed and turned, Evelyn's words echoing again in his head. He had once accused her of being too subtle, too understated. But now, with all the noise around him, he missed that quiet strength more than he expected. Savannah, on the other hand, considered the gala a success. She read the articles in the society columns, circled compliments in magazines, saved photos where she appeared most glamorous. She ignored the whispers that followed. But they were there, growing louder in private circles, shared over glasses of wine in upscale lounges. She's trying too hard. She's beautiful, but she lacks substance. Evelyn had grace. This one just has sparkle. Savannah didn't hear them directly, but she felt them. The glances, the hesitation in invitations, the subtle exclusion from certain inner circles. And though she dismissed them as envy, something inside her began to tighten. Doubt crept in through the cracks she refused to acknowledge. She confronted Andrew days later. "You haven't said anything about the gala. Did you even notice how much I pulled off?" "I noticed," he said, without looking up from his laptop. "It was impressive." "Impressive?" she repeated, her tone sharp. "That's all." "I didn't say it wasn't," he replied. "I just think maybe you're pushing too hard. Not everything needs to be a performance." Her expression hardened. "You mean not everything needs to remind you of her?" "That's not what I said. But it's what you meant." He stood, setting the laptop aside. "Savannah, you don't have to compete with someone who isn't here anymore." "She is here," she snapped. "She's in this house, in every room, in everyone's eyes when they look at me. Don't lie to me and say you don't see it." Andrew didn't answer, because he did see it. And the more Savannah fought to erase Evelyn's presence, the more visible it became. That night, Savannah sat alone in the empty ballroom, the remnants of the gala around her, scattered glasses, wilting flowers, dimmed lights. She looked around and realized for the first time that she had built something grand. Yes, but hollow. Beautiful, but brittle. And somewhere, in the distance, she thought she heard laughter, a soft, familiar sound, like a memory carried by the walls. She turned quickly, but the room was empty. And for a fleeting moment, she wondered if the woman she replaced had ever truly left at all. The city had changed in subtle ways since Evelyn Mercer left it behind, but its pace remained the same. A symphony of car horns, hurried footsteps, and the low hum of ambition that never slept. She stood at the window of her new apartment, smaller and older than the mansion she once called home, watching people below move with purpose while the steam from her untouched tea curled upward into the morning air. It wasn't luxury anymore. It wasn't comfort, but it was hers. And that was enough. She had chosen simplicity not as a retreat, but as a strategy, because real power didn't require chandeliers or silk drapes. Real power moved quietly, unseen, just like she had learned to. She had returned to the city weeks ago, without fanfare or announcement. No one saw her step off the train or carry her modest suitcase through the cracked pavement of a neighborhood that didn't know her name. She didn't call old friends or reach out to family. She didn't ask for favors or invitations. Instead, she kept to herself, built her routines slowly, methodically, like laying the foundation for something deeper, something larger than any revenge fantasy or emotional closure. Evelyn didn't want revenge. She wanted clarity. She wanted precision. And more than anything, she wanted control, not of Andrew, not of the mansion, but of the narrative that had been ripped from her hands. Her first move wasn't toward Andrew or Savannah. It was toward her old network. Names most people had forgotten, but she hadn't. She met quietly with Charles Whitman, a seasoned financial attorney who had once consulted for Andrew's company before being pushed out when Savannah encouraged a shift toward younger consultants with flashier resumes. Charles remembered Evelyn well, not just her poise, but her instincts. "I always said you were the one with the real mind for strategy," he told her over lunch in a quiet cafe, a place so unlike the high-end restaurants Andrew frequented now. Evelyn smiled, folding her hands calmly on the table. "That's because you weren't distracted by noise." She brought with her a folder. Nothing flashy, just a plain leather binder filled with documents she had been compiling for over a year. Records, patterns, anomalies in expense reports, vendor changes, shell contracts. She had watched from a distance, traced decisions, identified cracks long before they showed on the surface. Charles flipped through the papers, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. "This isn't just sloppy bookkeeping," he said finally. "It's structural rot. If you play this right, you could dismantle his empire piece by piece." Evelyn shook her head gently. "I don't want to dismantle him. I want to reveal him, to show what happens when ego replaces foundation." She didn't move recklessly. Every action was calculated, every meeting discreet. She contacted former employees who had been dismissed during Savannah's renovations of the estate staff. Some of them had been loyal to Evelyn, others simply professionals who resented being replaced by flashy incompetence. They were eager to speak. One by one, they offered insight, reports, small truths that, when combined, painted a much larger picture. There was the chef who had noticed irregularities in the estate's budget months before his dismissal. The accountant who had been replaced after raising questions about unsanctioned wire transfers. The gardener who had overheard a conversation between Savannah and a shady contractor about laundering renovation expenses. Evelyn didn't need scandals, just facts. And now, she had plenty. Through Charles, she made contact with an independent auditing firm that had no ties to Andrew's business. The audit was discreet, unofficial at first, presented as a hypothetical scenario. But even the hypotheticals sent red flags soaring. "He's exposed," the lead auditor said after reviewing the case file. "Not just from a business perspective, legally too. If regulators get wind of this, it won't just be embarrassing. It'll be catastrophic." Still, Evelyn waited. She didn't rush. Timing was everything. And part of timing meant understanding the person at the center of it all, Andrew Mercer. She knew him better than he knew himself. She knew how he responded to tension, how he hid fear beneath arrogance, how he believed appearances were more important than substance. He wouldn't see her coming, not until it was too late, because she wouldn't come through the front door. She'd come through the cracks in his foundation. Her next meeting was with Julian Marks, a former competitor of Andrew's who had always admired Evelyn's business mind more than her husband's bravado. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair at a rooftop bar overlooking the city skyline, "you're finally ready to build your own empire." Evelyn's lips curled into a small smile. "Not build, rebuild, on solid ground this time." Julian scanned the proposal she'd handed him. A new consultancy firm, lean, precise, focused on sustainable growth and ethical investments. A stark contrast to the glossy, high-risk model Andrew had championed since Savannah's influence. Julian nodded slowly. "You have something here. Something real. You're not trying to compete with Andrew. You're outclassing him." Word began to spread quietly. Investors who had grown uncomfortable with Andrew's recent decisions started making inquiries about Evelyn's project. Former partners who had distanced themselves from the Mercer empire returned tentative calls. No announcements were made, no press releases, no splashy social media launches. Just conversations behind closed doors. Interest was building, not because Evelyn was chasing it, but because she represented something people had grown hungry for: integrity, intelligence, stability. In a world obsessed with noise, her silence was magnetic. And yet, despite all this movement, Evelyn remained invisible to Andrew. He didn't know she had returned. He didn't know she was having dinner with his former mentors, that she was sitting in the same boardrooms he used to command, that her name was being whispered with increasing frequency in the corridors of power. He didn't know she had already begun shifting the ground beneath his feet. But Savannah felt it. She couldn't explain it, but something in her had changed since the gala. A tension in the house that didn't go away. A restlessness she couldn't define. She started asking questions about staff, about accounts, about rumors she heard at brunches and charity events. She grew sharper, more irritable. One afternoon, she found Andrew staring out the window of his study, a troubled look on his face. "What's wrong with you lately?" she asked, folding her arms. "You've been distracted for weeks." He didn't answer right away. "I think something's off," he said finally. "Business, the house, everything." She laughed dryly. "Maybe you're just finally noticing the cracks." Andrew turned to her slowly. "Did you do something?" She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Someone's pulling strings," he said. "And I don't think it's coming from the outside." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned away. "Maybe you're just finally realizing you're not as in control as you think." Later that night, Evelyn stood once again at the window of her apartment, looking out over the city. The same city where her name was beginning to rise again, not through gossip or spectacle, but through quiet competence. She sipped her tea and reached for her phone, scrolling through new messages. More meetings confirmed. More allies secured. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need validation. She only needed time. And time, now, was on her side. The first crack didn't come with a thunderous bang or a public scandal. It came in silence, slipped through the seams of Andrew's carefully manufactured world like a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. It began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, in the form of an envelope left on his desk at the firm. No logo, no return address, just his name typed in an unfamiliar font. He almost dismissed it as junk mail, but something about its weight, its starkness, made him pause. He opened it, fingers moving lazily at first, but the moment his eyes scanned the contents inside, something shifted in his chest. It was a brief letter, and signed, clinical, almost too polished. But the message was clear. A former investor had anonymously expressed concerns about recent inconsistencies in Mercer Holdings' financial statements. The language was cautious, but the implications were not. "We've noted a discrepancy in the Q2 filings compared to the original investor briefings. This raises potential exposure concerns that should be addressed immediately before escalation becomes necessary." Andrew read the letter twice, then a third time, each word echoing louder than the last. He pushed back from his desk, running a hand through his hair. It was probably nothing. An overreaction, a misunderstanding, or maybe someone with a grudge. But even as he tried to dismiss it, The knot in his stomach tightened. Something about the phrasing, it didn't feel like a bluff. It felt like a warning, and Andrew Mercer hated being warned. That evening, he brought the letter home, placing it gently on his nightstand like a ticking bomb he hadn't decided whether to defuse or ignore. He didn't tell Savannah. She was in the dressing room trying on outfits for another event, spinning in front of the mirror, asking him absent-minded questions about which pair of earrings looked more powerful. He mumbled half-answers, distracted, his mind replaying every recent boardroom conversation, every meeting where he nodded through reports he barely skimmed. He started to see things differently now, small moments that seemed irrelevant before, now heavy with consequence. The rushed numbers in the last quarterly presentation, the way one of his junior analysts had hesitated before confirming a margin estimate, the unfiled report that he had brushed aside after Savannah insisted it wasn't urgent. The next day, he asked his financial director to quietly review internal statements. "Just a spot check," he said casually. "No reason, just proactive management." But the look in the director's eyes told him his tone wasn't casual at all. 2 days later, the results arrived. Small discrepancies, yes, but too many of them. Duplicate invoices. Unexpected expense spikes in departments that hadn't changed operations. Consulting fees charged to shell vendors no one could identify. It wasn't catastrophic, not yet, but it was enough to make his pulse rise. Enough to suggest that someone had been watching the cracks form before he even noticed they existed. Andrew sat in his office that night long after the staff had gone home, the city outside humming beneath the glow of streetlights. He stared at the reports, trying to make sense of them, trying to remember where it had started. He remembered Evelyn's systems, how she tracked every transaction, every cent. Nothing escaped her attention. But with Savannah, things were looser, flashier. The focus had shifted from stability to projection. They were building a brand now, not a business. He had allowed style to replace structure. And structure, he realized now, was what kept the whole thing from crumbling. At home, Savannah noticed the change in him. He was quieter, more withdrawn. He answered her questions half-heartedly, forgot things, stared into space longer than usual. One evening, as she came down the stairs in a designer gown, ready to leave for a charity dinner, she stopped and looked at him slumped on the couch, tie loosened, drink untouched on the table beside him. "You're not coming?" she asked. He looked up slowly. "Not tonight." Her eyes narrowed. "Something's wrong." "What is it?" "It's business." "It's always business," she snapped. "But you're different. You've been different." "I'm just tired," he lied. "I need to regroup." She watched him a moment longer, then turned and walked out without another word. But the silence between them grew heavier that night, stretching across the marble floors and echoing in the spaces that had once held ambition, now burdened by suspicion. Meanwhile, Evelyn moved forward with quiet precision. She hadn't planted the letter on Andrew's desk, but she knew who had. A former investor she had met 2 weeks earlier at a luncheon, a man who had grown increasingly wary of Andrew's leadership and, after hearing Evelyn's insights, decided to take action. She hadn't asked him to write the letter. She hadn't needed to. All she had done was share what she knew. The rest unraveled naturally. Because when truth is placed gently in the right hands, it doesn't need to shout. It simply moves forward, steady and undeniable. And Evelyn wasn't done. She had begun reconnecting with more of Andrew's past partners, subtly reminding them of the days when Mercer Holdings stood on values rather than vanity. She didn't criticize him directly. She didn't need to. She only had to ask the right questions. "How's the new direction working for you? Do you feel the same confidence you used to? Have you noticed any inconsistencies in the quarterly meetings?" Each conversation was another thread pulled loose, another doubt planted. Not lies, just observations. Observations Andrew had hoped no one else noticed. And back at the mansion, Savannah was beginning to unravel. She sensed something she couldn't quite name. The staff's eyes lingered too long. Conversations fell silent when she entered a room. Even Andrew's loyal assistant had started responding to her requests with clipped replies and vague answers. She cornered Andrew in his study one night, demanding to know what was going on. "There's pressure building," he said simply. "From who?" she snapped. "Why aren't you doing anything?" "I'm trying," he said, his voice low. "But there are holes in places I didn't expect." "Well, fix them," she said sharply. "You're Andrew Mercer. You don't get threatened. You threaten." He didn't respond. Because for the first time, he didn't feel like Andrew Mercer anymore. He felt like a man who had lost sight of the ground beneath him, who had built castles on unstable soil, and now watched them tremble with every quiet gust of truth. Later that night, after Savannah had gone to bed, Andrew returned to his office and opened Evelyn's old notebooks, stored in a locked drawer he hadn't touched since the day she left. He flipped through pages of her handwriting, calculated notes, financial forecasts, client behavior patterns, logistical plans. It was all there, organized with clinical precision. It dawned on him then just how much he had depended on her, not for companionship, but for clarity. She hadn't just been a partner in his life. She had been the compass. And now, without her, he had wandered into a storm he didn't know how to navigate. The first crack had become a fracture, and Evelyn hadn't even lifted a finger. Not directly, but somehow, everything was already beginning to fall apart. The mansion stood as it always had, grand, imposing, a symbol of status and wealth perched atop a hillside that overlooked the city like a king surveying his domain. But inside, the energy had changed. Something intangible had crept into the walls, something that didn't creak like old floorboards or flicker like faulty light bulbs. It was heavier than dust and quieter than whispers. It was unrest. It pulsed beneath the surface of marble floors and echoed in the silence between spoken words. And it was growing, feeding on the tension that now threaded through every hallway, every corridor, every room touched by the presence of Savannah Hale. Staff members who once moved with efficiency now stumbled through their tasks, distracted by gossip, unsettled by glances exchanged in passing. Rumors circulated faster than silver trays. One housekeeper claimed she saw Savannah tear up a letter from an anonymous sender, one that she insisted had the old Mrs. Mercer's handwriting. Another said they found a ledger in the trash with discrepancies circled in red ink. The new house manager dismissed the stories, calling them exaggerations fueled by nostalgia. But those who had been there long enough knew better. The house wasn't just divided by duty anymore, it was divided by allegiance. Some still held quiet loyalty to Evelyn, even in her absence. Others clung to Savannah's authority out of fear, not respect. Maria, the senior housekeeper, had begun keeping detailed logs again, not because she was asked to, but because she felt something was coming. It wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. She saw it in the way Andrew walked through the house, shoulders heavier than before, distracted and short-tempered. She heard it in the way Savannah slammed doors after phone calls, her voice rising in frustration at assistants who couldn't produce answers she didn't know how to ask. Even the gardener, who usually stayed silent, mentioned he'd been approached by someone asking questions about supply deliveries and maintenance records. The mention of it made Maria pause. That kind of inquiry didn't come from idle curiosity. Someone was digging, and Maria already had a suspicion about who it was. Savannah, oblivious to the deeper currents shifting beneath her feet, believed she was simply weathering a rough patch. In her mind, the staff were just adjusting to her leadership style. The suppliers pulling out were merely unprofessional. The consultants growing colder were jealous of her place beside Andrew. Every setback, every uncomfortable glance, every delay was rationalized as external. She didn't yet understand that the storm was internal. She didn't understand that control wasn't about volume or visibility, it was about foundation. And hers was already cracking beneath her. She began to notice it more acutely when her closest confidant among the staff, Elise, the young assistant she had hired herself, grew distant. Elise, who once clung to every word Savannah uttered, now responded with polite disinterest, her enthusiasm dulled. When Savannah questioned her about a missing guest list for an upcoming luncheon, Elise hesitated. "I handed it to you last week," she said flatly. "No, you didn't," Savannah snapped. "I placed it on your desk," Elise replied, eyes steady. "You were on the phone." Savannah narrowed her eyes. "Then why didn't you remind me?" Elise shrugged. "I assumed you knew what you were doing." It was a small comment, delivered without venom, but it stung deeply. And Savannah, never one to forget a slight, made a mental note to find a replacement. But beneath her irritation, a thread of doubt tugged at her. Had she really overlooked it? Or had someone else moved it, manipulated it, twisted something behind her back? She grew increasingly suspicious of everyone. She started reviewing emails twice, questioning receipts, demanding explanations for minor mistakes. Her paranoia infected the atmosphere like a slow poison. Staff became colder, more mechanical. They did their jobs, but the heart was gone. The warmth that once existed even in the quietest moments of the Mercer household, when Evelyn would smile at the cook's new recipe or compliment the florist on a delicate arrangement, had been stripped bare. What remained was sterile obedience. Andrew noticed, but he didn't know what to do about it. He came home later each night, buried himself in paperwork, made excuses about back-to-back meetings. When Savannah tried to engage him in conversation, he nodded absently, more occupied by spreadsheets than his wife. She accused him of neglect. He responded with silence. One night, she confronted him in the study, arms crossed, eyes burning with frustration. "Something's going on, and you won't talk to me," she said. "I'm trying to keep the business from falling apart." He replied without looking up. "You mean your ex-wife's shadow is finally catching up with you?" He looked at her then, not angry, but exhausted. "You think this is about Evelyn?" "I think everything is about Evelyn," Savannah snapped. "Even when she's not here, you act like she's in the room." Andrew leaned back, running a hand down his face. Maybe because she was the only one who actually knew how this house worked. Her expression froze. Neither of them spoke after that. The next day, Andrew met discreetly with a private consultant, a man Evelyn had once worked with during the early days of their business. He asked for a quiet audit of internal systems, a check into new vendor agreements, and a background review of recent hires. The findings weren't shocking, but they were unsettling. Several vendors Savannah had recommended were overpriced and poorly rated. Contracts had been signed hastily, some without full legal review. Invoices had been inflated. Deliveries reported as completed had no documentation. It wasn't criminal yet, but it was careless. And carelessness, in business, was a ticking bomb. Andrew confronted Savannah again, this time with documents in hand. "Did you vet these suppliers before bringing them in?" "I trusted the team," she said defensively. "Then your team failed you." "They failed us," she corrected sharply. "No," he said coldly. "They failed me because I let them think you were capable of leading them." The statement hung in the air like smoke. She didn't respond. That night, the house was quieter than usual. The staff had retreated early, conversations behind closed doors muffled but still present. In the kitchen, Maria and Thomas spoke in hushed tones, sharing their concerns and speculations. Thomas admitted he had been contacted by someone outside the estate, someone asking for specific dates, specific documents. He hadn't provided anything yet, but he was close. "Do you think she's back?" Maria asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. "I think she never really left." Across town, Evelyn sat in a quiet office, reviewing her latest correspondence. The internal dynamics of the Mercer estate were unraveling precisely as she predicted, and all she had done was plant a few seeds. She hadn't lifted a single stone. The weight of Andrew and Savannah's decisions had done the rest. She picked up her pen and signed a contract, another ally brought into her new venture, another piece falling into place. The house she once called home was still standing, but its walls were beginning to shake, and she hadn't even stepped inside. Not yet. Savannah had always believed that charm could protect her, that beauty could shield her from consequences, that proximity to power was the same as having power. It was the illusion she wore like a second skin, the belief that because she stood beside a man like Andrew Mercer, she was untouchable. But illusions are fragile things, and when they begin to crack, they do not do so gently. They shatter. It began with a phone call on a quiet afternoon, one that caught her entirely off guard. She was lounging by the pool in a designer robe, sunglasses perched on her nose, flipping through a magazine that featured photos of their gala 2 months prior. She barely glanced at the screen when the phone rang. It was Elise, her once loyal assistant who had grown increasingly distant in recent weeks. "I think you should hear this from me before it reaches anyone else," Elise said, her voice unnervingly calm. Savannah sat up straighter. "Hear what?" "Elijah West," Elise said. "A reporter. He's working on a story. Something about a fraud scheme involving a company your name is tied to. He called me asking questions." Savannah's mouth went dry. "That's ridiculous. I've never signed anything like that." "That's the problem," Elise replied. "Your signature's on the paperwork. I checked the vendor files myself. Someone traced payments to an account in your name. He said he's giving you a chance to comment before going to print." Savannah's hands began to tremble. Her voice cracked as she asked, "What kind of fraud?" Elise paused. "Misappropriation of estate funds." Something about renovations, vendor kickbacks. They're calling it a laundering scheme. Savannah hung up before Elise finished speaking, her heart pounding in her chest. She ran to the study, yanked open drawers, pulled folders from shelves. Contracts, invoices, receipts. All things she had glossed over, confident that her signature meant more than her understanding. She had trusted the vendors. She had believed Andrew's team would handle the details. But now, buried under a pile of papers she had never truly read, were pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was part of. And someone, somewhere, had assembled it before her. Andrew came home that evening to find her pacing the study, documents scattered across the floor. "What happened?" he asked, his voice calm but wary. She looked at him, eyes wild. "I think someone's framing me. There's a journalist. He's saying I'm involved in fraud." Andrew's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't do anything," she insisted. "But my name's on everything. Contracts. Accounts. I don't know how it happened." He picked up one of the documents from the floor. "This is your signature." "I didn't know what I was signing," she snapped. "You always told me it was routine paperwork." "You never asked," he replied coldly. "You were too busy decorating hallways and planning luncheons." Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. "I thought I was helping." "You were helping yourself," Andrew said. "And now, you've dragged this house into a scandal we may not be able to walk away from." She stared at him in disbelief. "So that's it? You think I did this on purpose?" "I don't know what to think," he said, turning away. "But if my name ends up in a courtroom because of your negligence, I'll make sure you take the fall." His words hit her harder than the accusation itself. All this time, she thought she had security. She thought being Andrew Mercer's wife came with protection. But now she saw the truth. She was a shield, not a partner, a figurehead, not a foundation. And when trouble came, she'd be the one sacrificed to preserve his name. Days passed, and the story spread. It didn't hit the headlines immediately, but it traveled through networks, through whispered conversations in boardrooms, through subtle pauses during meetings. Andrew's investors grew colder. Business deals stalled. A major partnership he'd been nurturing for months pulled out without explanation. Savannah's name was no longer met with admiration, but with caution. And worse, Andrew had begun distancing himself from her publicly. He no longer brought her to meetings. He no longer spoke of her with pride. In fact, he barely spoke of her at all. Savannah, feeling the walls close in, decided to confront Elise. She demanded a meeting, hoping to piece together what had gone wrong. Elise agreed, but her demeanor was nothing like the timid assistant Savannah remembered. She was composed, direct, unmoved by Savannah's panic. "Why are you doing this?" Savannah asked. "I'm not doing anything," Elise said. "I just told the truth." "Why now?" "Because someone else gave me the courage to," she replied. Savannah's heart sank. "Evelyn." Elise nodded once. "She didn't ask me to betray you. She didn't even ask me to dig. She just reminded me what integrity looks like. And after months of watching you ruin this house, that was enough." Savannah sat back in her chair, the weight of betrayal crashing over her. "She's orchestrating all of this." "No," Elise said. "She's revealing it." That night, Savannah returned to the mansion a different woman, deflated, unraveling. She found Andrew in the garden, standing beneath the pergola Evelyn had designed. He looked up at her, eyes tired. "I'm leaving," she said. He didn't stop her. She turned and walked inside, climbing the stairs to the bedroom that never truly felt like hers. She packed in silence, ignoring the luxury that once thrilled her. Dresses, shoes, jewelry, all carefully folded into suitcases she never expected to need again. As she zipped the last one, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror. She didn't see a queen. She didn't see a victor. She saw a woman who had mistaken proximity for purpose, who had believed that stepping into someone's place meant inheriting their power. Before she left, she walked into the study one last time. On the desk was a framed photo of Andrew and Evelyn from years ago, long forgotten behind a stack of books. She picked it up, stared at it for a moment, then set it gently on the center of the desk. A final act of quiet acknowledgement. She left without a word, without a tear. And the mansion, once her kingdom, closed its doors behind her without a sound. The house was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that comes after a celebration or a long day, but the suffocating stillness that settles in a place hollowed out from within. Without Savannah's heels clicking across the marble floors, Without her perfume lingering in the air, without her constant movement and demands, the Mercer mansion felt heavier, colder, like it had been exhaling a breath it didn't know it had been holding. Andrew walked through the halls with a strange detachment, as though seeing the place for the first time in years. The newly installed light fixtures Savannah had insisted upon now looked gaudy under the pale afternoon sun. The art pieces she had chosen appeared hollow, pretentious, out of place among the deep heritage carved into the house's bones. Every detail screamed of a failed performance, a costume party that had gone on too long. He entered the dining room and stood still for several moments. The long table sat undisturbed, the chairs neatly arranged, the silverware untouched. The room looked perfect, but it felt sterile, lifeless. He could almost hear Evelyn's voice, gentle but firm, guiding the staff during preparations, making sure every guest felt welcomed, every corner radiated warmth. There had been balance then. Now there was only silence. But it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the silence that came when something collapsed. A letter arrived that morning from his legal team. An audit had been initiated, not by his company, but by a regulatory body triggered by a formal complaint. The report detailed inconsistencies in corporate filings, suspected misuse of investor funds, and questionable vendor relationships tied directly to Mercer Holdings' financial statements. The letter was formal, clinical, emotionless. But the message was clear. The investigation was real, and it had begun. Andrew read the letter twice, then dropped it on his desk and stared blankly out the window. For a moment, he felt suspended, like the world around him had frozen in place. He had built this company from the ground up, or so he used to say. But Evelyn had been the architect, the structural engineer, the one who quietly ensured that everything had integrity beneath the surface. Without her, it hadn't taken long for the cracks to deepen into fault lines. The following days blurred into chaos. Calls came in nonstop, concerned investors, disoriented partners, attorneys scrambling to control the narrative. Several clients pulled their accounts. News outlets caught wind of the investigation and began publishing speculative headlines. The word fraud appeared far too often. Andrew tried to manage the damage, tried to project calm, but the walls were closing in. Every document reviewed revealed another error, another oversight, another piece of a puzzle he hadn't even realized existed. For every lie Savannah might have signed, Andrew had approved the foundation it stood upon. His own name was on every dotted line. His signature was all over the collapse. At home, the staff moved with somber efficiency. No one asked questions. No one offered words of comfort. Maria cleaned rooms without speaking. Thomas poured Andrew's drink at night with mechanical precision, never lingering longer than necessary. The house that once echoed with social gatherings now felt like a mausoleum for everything he had taken for granted. In the middle of the unraveling, a final blow arrived. A financial audit concluded that several major transactions, believed to be routine renovations, had been intentionally overbilled and funneled through shell companies. Companies created under Andrew's name, managed by third parties he didn't recognize, but which were legally tied to his firm. Whether Savannah had known the full extent didn't matter anymore. The legal responsibility fell on him. The tax fraud charges were filed swiftly. Court summons followed. His legal team scrambled to negotiate, but the damage was irreversible. His accounts were frozen. Assets were seized. Even the mansion was no longer secure, marked for valuation and potential liquidation pending the court's ruling. The day the officials arrived to assess the estate for seizure was the day Andrew realized he had lost everything. They walked through the house methodically, making notes, taking photos, opening drawers, lifting documents. He stood in the foyer, watching strangers touch the edges of his life, measuring its worth in columns and forms. He didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Savannah was gone. The business was gone. The trust he had once commanded in the market was gone. What remained was a man stripped bare, watching his legacy dissolve one form at a time. In the middle of the chaos, Thomas approached him quietly. "There's someone here," he said. Andrew turned slowly. "Who?" "A delivery," Thomas said. "From Mrs. Mercer." For a moment, Andrew's mind didn't register the words. Then, slowly, he walked to the entrance hall, where a courier stood holding a large envelope addressed in handwriting he hadn't seen in over a year. His heart pounded as he took it, nodding absently at the courier who disappeared into the rain. He opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single letter and a bundle of documents. The letter was short. I never needed to destroy you, Andrew. You simply built yourself without a foundation. The rest was inevitable. But I hope, in losing everything, you finally understand what you had. There was no signature, no bitterness, no gloating, just truth. Andrew sank into the nearest chair, the documents slipping from his hands onto the polished floor. Bank statements, evidence of her own investigation, legal correspondences. She had known everything long before it reached him. She had predicted this downfall not with revenge in her heart, but with clarity in her vision. She hadn't come back to reclaim anything. She had simply waited for the house of cards to fall on its own. That night, for the first time in years, Andrew walked into the East Wing study, the room Evelyn had once used as her private workspace. He sat in her old chair, surrounded by empty bookshelves and faded memories, and closed his eyes. The silence was different now. It wasn't hollow. It was humbling. Outside, the rain fell steadily. The lights in the mansion flickered softly, and the walls, the very same walls he once believed were his domain, now felt like witnesses to a truth too long ignored. The mansion wasn't crumbling because of betrayal. It was crumbling because it had been built on the illusion of control, and the illusion had finally shattered. The city was buzzing with rumors, whispers, and speculation. Financial columns dissected Andrew Mercer's downfall with surgical precision, dissecting every transaction, every signature, every public appearance he had made over the last year. Journalists pieced together timelines, guests at high society events recalled awkward conversations, and former business associates stepped forward in hushed tones to say they'd seen it coming. They hadn't. Not really. They had seen the excess, the arrogance, the spectacle, but not the quiet erosion underneath. Not the slow dismantling orchestrated with such precision it could have been mistaken for fate. Evelyn Mercer hadn't thrown stones. She had merely uncovered the floorboards and let everyone see what had been crawling beneath. The mansion was quiet again, but this time it wasn't silence born of luxury or comfort. It was the silence of decay. The rooms were stripped of their ornaments, furniture wrapped in plastic, artworks removed, valuables cataloged and boxed. A for sale sign now hung discreetly near the gated entrance, and though the house still stood tall, it carried a hollowness that no amount of renovation could ever undo. Andrew sat alone in what used to be the music room, the sunlight pouring in through tall windows, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air. He hadn't slept well in days. His lawyers had stopped making promises. The court date loomed ahead. The media was relentless. And through it all, Evelyn's name kept surfacing, not as the cause of his fall, but as the shadow that had always been there, silently illuminating the depth of his own failure. It was a late afternoon when Evelyn arrived. She didn't knock. She didn't announce herself. Thomas opened the door for her without needing a word of explanation. She stepped into the grand hallway she had once designed in delicate shades of cream and bronze, now dulled by time and the heavy tread of strangers. She wasn't there to gloat. She wasn't there to relive the past. She was there for closure, the kind that doesn't come from apologies, but from truth laid bare. Andrew looked up when she entered the room. His face was pale, older than his age, eyes sunken from sleepless nights and worry. For a moment, he didn't speak. Neither did she. The silence between them was no longer charged with anger. It was just real, and in its stillness, everything that had once been unsaid began to rise to the surface. "I knew it was you," he said finally, his voice low. "Maybe not from the beginning, but I knew." Evelyn walked toward the window, pausing to rest her hand lightly on the frame. "I didn't hide it. You didn't have to," he said. "Everything you did, it was all legal. Every document, every conversation. You didn't tear me down. You just let gravity do its work." She turned to face him. "I didn't do it to punish you, Andrew." "Then why?" he asked. "Why not just walk away and never look back?" "I did walk away," she replied. "But I couldn't ignore what you were turning into. Not for revenge. For clarity. For the people you dragged with you. For the business I helped build while you paraded it around like a trophy. You didn't lose because of me. You lost because you never understood what held everything together." His jaw clenched. "I trusted you." "No," she said gently. "You used me. You relied on me without recognizing my worth. You let someone else wear a crown I helped forge, thinking she could command a kingdom just by standing beside you. You replaced loyalty with vanity, substance with spectacle, and when it all fell apart, you still didn't look at yourself first. He swallowed hard. I made mistakes. Evelyn nodded slowly. You did, but not just in business. In life. He rose from his seat, slowly, like the weight of his choices was physically binding him. He moved closer, standing just a few steps from her. I thought money would make everything simpler, he said. That success meant I could start over, build something shinier. But now I realize, I never really understood what I had. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time in many months, there was no resentment in her eyes. Only calm resolve. It wasn't just about me, Andrew. It was about everything you abandoned in the name of ambition. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. Then you won't be disappointed. She replied without cruelty, just truth. He let out a bitter breath, part laughter, part regret. And what now? What happens to all of this? That depends on you, she said. You can let it crush you, or you can learn from it. But either way, it's not my story anymore. She turned to leave, her heels echoing softly across the cold floor. He watched her walk away, the last trace of grace the mansion would ever see. For a moment, he wanted to call her back, say something, anything, that might anchor her to him again. But he didn't, because deep down, he knew she had already moved beyond him. Thomas met her at the door, nodding silently. Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting a golden glow across the estate's grand facade. Evelyn paused at the threshold, looking back one last time, not at Andrew, not at the house, but at the years spent within its walls. And then she stepped out, her steps steady, her purpose clear. Inside, Andrew sank back into the armchair, staring at the letter she'd left behind. A final note handwritten in her elegant script. You mistook silence for weakness, but it was strategy all along. He closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling deeper than any headline ever could. And somewhere in that empty house, beneath chandeliers that no longer sparkled and walls that no longer whispered promise, a man finally realized that the real fortune he had lost had never been in stocks or assets or luxury. It had been in the woman who once stood beside him, not behind, not beneath, but beside. And that loss, he knew, would echo louder than any scandal ever could. Evelyn Mercer stood at the edge of the balcony, overlooking the city skyline as the first hints of morning began to stretch across the horizon. The sky was a soft canvas of pastels, blue bleeding into orange, orange brushing against lavender. The world was still quiet, caught between the stillness of night and the stirring of a new day. And for the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to breathe without the weight of the past pressing against her chest. This apartment wasn't grand, not in the way the mansion had been. It didn't have a marble staircase, nor imported chandeliers, nor sprawling gardens. But it had peace. It had purpose. And it had become her sanctuary, her starting point, not from scratch, but from experience. The woman who stood there now was not the same woman who had once poured tea in silence while her husband planned his life around someone else. She was no longer the woman who had quietly packed her things and walked away from a house that had turned into a stage for someone else's performance. She was no longer the woman overshadowed by silk gowns and hollow smiles. She had transformed, not through revenge, but through resolve, not through bitterness, but through rebuilding. Every decision she had made in the past year had been intentional, deliberate, grounded in dignity. And now, she wasn't looking back anymore. She was looking ahead. Below her, the city stirred, cars crawling along sleepy streets, shopkeepers unlocking doors, joggers weaving through sidewalks. Life moved on, and so did she. The foundation she had built, quietly, methodically, patiently, was now ready to emerge. Her new consultancy firm, Valor Strategies, was opening its doors that morning. A modest office space in a refurbished building downtown, staffed by professionals who valued precision over spectacle, substance over show. Many were former employees from Mercer Holdings, people she had personally recruited, not out of spite toward Andrew, but out of a belief that their talents deserved recognition in an environment that respected them. Her mission wasn't just business growth. It was about empowerment, about guiding overlooked professionals toward leadership, about helping women in corporate transitions reclaim their voices, about proving that strength doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. The first clients were already signed. The buzz was growing. Investors were paying attention. But more than any of that, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years: ownership. Not just of a company, but of her own story. Later that morning, she arrived at the office early. The walls were painted in warm tones, the furniture understated but elegant. No flash, no excess, just functionality with grace. Her team was already assembling in the conference room, reviewing files, setting up presentations. She greeted them with a calm smile, her voice steady as she addressed them for the first time as their leader. "This isn't about competing with anyone," she said. "It's about creating something sustainable, something real. We don't chase chaos. We build structure. We don't sell illusions. We offer clarity." The team nodded, inspired not by theatrics, but by sincerity. Evelyn led them through the strategy session with ease, her knowledge sharp, her delivery grounded. Every point was clear, every plan actionable. There were no empty words, no exaggerated promises, just results. And when the first client stepped into the meeting room, a former corporate executive navigating post-divorce reentry into business, Evelyn listened deeply, offered insight with empathy, and mapped out a plan that balanced professionalism with personal growth. That evening, as the day wrapped up, she returned home and found a letter in her mailbox, an elegant envelope with no return address. She opened it slowly, expecting another business inquiry or congratulatory note. But the handwriting inside was unmistakably Andrew's. It was short, just a few lines. "I hope someday I understand the strength it took to walk away without anger, to rebuild without destruction, to lead without needing applause. You were always 10 steps ahead of me, Evelyn. I just never stopped to notice." There was no request for forgiveness, no plea for reconciliation, just acknowledgement, late but honest. She folded the letter quietly and placed it in the drawer of her desk, not out of sentiment, but out of finality. Some words don't need a response. They simply close the chapter. A week later, the Mercer mansion was sold at auction. A new family moved in, unaware of its history, its former grandeur, or the echoes of choices that still clung faintly to the walls. The marble floors were polished again, the rooms filled with new furniture, the garden replanted. Time did what time always does. It moved forward. But in another corner of the city, something far more significant was blooming. Evelyn's Foundation launched its first public initiative, a financial literacy program for women emerging from high-net-worth divorces. The event was modest in size, but massive in impact. Former staff from the Mercer estate volunteered. Maria gave a speech about resilience. Thomas sat in the back, listening quietly, pride in his eyes. Evelyn took the stage last, not with a dramatic entrance, but with a quiet presence that commanded the room. She spoke of growth, of independence, of dignity. She never mentioned names, never told the story directly, but her message carried the weight of experience. "There's a difference," she said softly, "between being replaced and being reborn. One ends your story, the other begins it." The crowd stood in ovation, not because she asked them to, but because they saw themselves in her. In her calm defiance, in her grace under pressure, in her unwavering determination to rise without destroying. That was her power, not vengeance, but transformation. As the sun set and the event wrapped up, Evelyn walked to her car alone, smiling at the life she had chosen. A life not built in shadows, but in light. A life not defined by what was taken, but by what was rebuilt. She drove home with the windows down, wind in her hair, the city unfolding before her like a story she had finally reclaimed. And somewhere behind her, in a mansion that no longer belonged to her, a man sat alone in a room filled with silence, holding on to the memory of a woman he had once believed was replaceable, until he realized, far too late, that she was the only thing that had ever truly held it all together.